So when we're thinking about what's happening with thyroid disease, when there's hyperthyroidism, remember, everything gets revved up. So there's increased blood flows, increased clearances. And when there's hypothyroidism, the opposite is true. So hyperthyroidism, we're going to have increase. And see, the warfarin thing is a little tricky because, I don't know, I think of the warfarin and you think, oh, well, the warfarin clearance is going to be increased. Therefore, you're going to need to give more drug. Well, what you need to think about with warfarin is the synthesis and clearance of vitamin K, not the warfarin. So the vitamin K synthesis and clearance will also be revved up because of the, the vitamin K dependent clotting factors will be revved up, and therefore think about the vitamin K dependent clotting factors, not the warfarin. So, and what's more profound is the increase in the clearance of the clotting factors. So the clotting factors are being cleared more quickly. So if the clotting factors are being cleared more quickly, are you going to need more or less warfarin? Well, if there's less clotting factors around because the clearance is increased, then you're going to need less warfarin. So it's with the warfarin stuff, it's a little tricky because you don't want to think about the clearance of the warfarin, but the clearance of the vitamin K dependent clotting factors. Okay? So in hyperthyroidism, you're going to have an increase in the metabolism of the vitamin K dependent clotting factors, therefore needing less warfarin. Hypothyroidism would then be the opposite. Clearance is decreased of the vitamin K dependent clotting factors, so there's more of those around, so you need a higher dose of warfarin. Okay? So when you're thinking about warfarin, don't think about the warfarin itself, but think about the vitamin K dependent clotting factors and the clearance of those. Digoxin is also very dependent upon thyroid status. So in a hyperthyroid patient, they sometimes call them digoxin resistant, but it's because there's an increase in clearance, an increase in volume, and there may be some changes in the myocardial tissue necessitating higher doses of digoxin. This is also the case for beta blockers. So you have to give higher than normal doses because of increases in clearance, and maybe also changes in the tissue itself. When they become euthyroid, you need to then decrease the dose back to what it was originally. So it follows where the thyroid is. If a patient is hypothyroid, they may be very sensitive to digoxin, and therefore they're going to have smaller than what you would normally think of, smaller doses than what you would normally give. So hyperthyroid, again, think increased clearance, possibly more resistant tissues. Therefore, you have to give higher doses. And hypothyroid would be the opposite. When you become euthyroid, though, chemically or because of surgery or whatever, you need to also change those digoxin doses back to what they would have been in a euthyroid patient. All right, now we get into some interesting things about the FDA and levothyroxine. Thyroid replacement was one of the first drugs that we had available. They took the hormone from animals. In the late 1800s, we started supplementing thyroid from animals. In the 50s, we started having the synthetic T4 available, but it was before all the new drug application rules that we now have in place for the FDA. So it was grandfathered in, and up until lately, nothing was considered AB rated because we didn't have any of the data for levothyroxine because it was a grandfathered drug. In other words, it didn't have to go through the process, so we didn't really know how to compare the data between manufacturers. And in 1997, there were at least 37 manufacturers of levothyroxine on the market. Betty Dong is a professor at the University of California, San Francisco. And she did a lot of research in endocrinology, cardiovascular disease, and HIV. She was contracted by Boots and later Knoll, who bought Boots Pharmaceuticals, to study the bioequivalence of Synthroid. Synthroid was at that time the gold standard, and most people were on Synthroid, and you were not allowed to generically substitute. So they had a corner on the market, and they wanted to show this then. Boots decided they wanted to have data that showed that they were superior to the other preparations of thyroid hormone. So Betty did the research, and here are some of the data that she found. And what you've got here is the free thyroxine index, and you can see the Synthroid, or the open circles on the left. And here's the Synthroid. Geneva and Rugby are the closed circles and squares, and then the open squares is Levoxin. So here you can see them all. It was probably similar half-lives, and area under the curves, depending on how you look at it, could be very similar too. This is the thyrotropin post-drug too, and here again the Synthroid is here. All the other products are here. Her findings were there was not a statistically significant difference between Synthroid, Boots' formulation of levothyroxine, and several of the other available products. And the interesting thing here was that Boots tried to, and then later Knoll tried to block her publishing the results. And there was a big fight in the courts, basically, and this was sort of a landmark decision, because if a company contracts you to do research and then that research doesn't favor the company, they can squelch the reporting of that data. Well, that flies in the face of a researcher's ability to be honest with what they found. So basically, the University of California, San Francisco, went to court against these pharmaceutical companies because they felt their academic integrity required them to share this information. So it's actually kind of an interesting fight. Well, she ended up being able to publish it about 10 years after she actually did the work, and which brought into question the bioequivalence of all of the products. So what ended up happening from that was that in the summer of 1997, the FDA announced that all the levothyroxine products were going to be considered new drugs and needed to go through the new drug application process in order to be marketed in the U.S. So they gave the manufacturers 3 years, basically, and actually it was extended an extra year to submit their applications to get products approved. So basically they said, okay, you guys, everybody has to go through the process at this point so that we can compare things and we have some data on bioavailability, etc. So currently these are the drugs that are approved by the FDA. A couple of them, like the Levolet, is not available in the U.S., but the others are all, I think, available in the U.S. So you probably are familiar with many of these, but they're not necessarily considered to be able to be interchanged between them. This is a table that tells how we actually can tell if something is interchangeable or not. If it's got an AB rating, then it is interchangeable. In other words, Synthroid can be interchanged with Unithroid. Synthroid can also be interchanged with Levo-T or LT4-myelin, but cannot be interchanged for Levoxyl, Levothyroid, Novothyrox, or Levolet. So you can see that this is a very complex system that is not very user-friendly for either physicians or pharmacists. So basically this explains it. So if it doesn't have an AB rating, then you can't interchange them. So in general, Levo-T and LT4-myelin are both interchangeable with Synthroid and AB3 to Levoxyl. All right. So in summary, the FDA has deemed some preparations to be therapeutically equivalent, and that may not be. A lot of people question that, whether they actually are bioequivalent, but most of them have not been formally compared to one another, so you can't really interchange them. So I don't know if we ended up better or not in the long run. Between the years of 1987 and 1997, the FDA received a lot of reports of adverse drug reactions, and they became aware of many problems with subpotency, stability failures, and superpotency. What they found is that these drugs degraded very quickly. So the levothyroxine would lose its potency between 8 months and at the most 12 months, they would lose the potency. And products in some cases were routinely released with more drug than they were supposed to have so that they would have a longer shelf life. So clinicians expressed their concerns about the substitution issue, which we talked about, and also about the overages and the decrease in the stability of the products as far as their shelf life. And there was a lot of discussion with all the endocrine societies and thyroid societies in the FDA. So what they also came to say is because of the stability problem, in general, drugs, they are assumed to be bioequivalent in general. The definition of bioequivalent, they could differ from one to another by 12.5% and still be considered the same. So that's okay for some drugs, but for thyroid, it's such small amounts that we're talking about that that's like changing the dose. So as you can see, the difference between 100 micrograms and 112 micrograms, which is the next available dosing, is actually increasing by 12%, which is about how much you're allowed to have and still be considered to be bioequivalent. So you can have a whole nother dose and still be considered bioequivalent. So it's not really the plus or minus 12.5% is not really a good, is not really tight enough for levothyroxine. So the potency specifications have been tightened for levothyroxine. So now they have to be between 95% and 105% of what is labeled. And this was decreed in 2008, and now all the products that are on the shelf should be at this tight range of potency between plus or minus 5%, basically, from what is labeled. So what does this mean to us? Well, patients need to be educated to be able to verify their brand of levothyroxine. They should know what it looks like, and make sure that if it is changed, they be educated about that, if the pill changes at all. And they shouldn't be changing, in my opinion, between products. If it's cost effective, or if their insurance plan forces them to change, you're going to have to get another serum TSH to reevaluate, but you need to wait 6 to 8 weeks before looking at that, to make sure that the TSHs are within the range, and obviously their symptoms also. You want to make sure that they are continuing to be chemically euthyroid. All right, so that's it, and we'll work on some problems in class on Thursday. Thanks for your attention. See you soon.